Welcome back my channel Shattered Trust Stories. This is the beginning of a narrative that taps into the deepest emotions of human relationships, trust, vulnerability, and the intense pain of betrayal. Imagine a life built with love, a union between two individuals who once promised to stand by each other through thick and thin. They share their dreams, their ambitions, and most intimately, their hearts. Each person invests not just time, but their very soul into the relationship. They trust one another implicitly, each believing that the other has their best interests at heart. This trust is not just an abstract idea, but the very foundation upon which their lives are constructed. Together, they make plans for the future, buying a house, having children, traveling the world. They feel invincible because they are united in their love and belief in each other. Now, imagine one day waking up to find that this foundation has shattered. The life you have carefully built, the future you dreamed of, starts to disintegrate, not from an external threat, but from the very person you thought would never let you down. The person who you believed in, trusted more than anyone else in the world, has betrayed you. This betrayal might take many forms. It could be infidelity, lies, manipulation, or some other form of deceit that tears apart the fabric of your shared existence. The hurt is not just in the betrayal itself, but in the realization that the person you loved and trusted was capable of such treachery. The pain is magnified by the deep emotional bond you shared, the very bond that has now been weaponized against you. As the story unfolds, the victim of this betrayal must confront not only the emotional devastation of being wronged but also the psychological torment of questioning their own judgment. How could they have been so blind? How could they not have seen the signs? These questions flood the mind, as the very essence of what they thought they knew about love and trust is put into question. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's also about the aftermath. The victim's response to the betrayal is often a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion. In some cases, the response can turn into a desire for revenge, a burning need to right the wrong, to regain control over a situation that has left them powerless. This drive for vengeance might manifest in subtle manipulations, calculated moves, or even more direct confrontations. The once gentle soul is now hardened by the betrayal, and revenge becomes an obsession, not just for justice but as a way to reclaim their sense of dignity and control. At its core, this is a story of love turned sour, trust betrayed, and the consequences of manipulating the most sacred human bonds. It forces us to confront the darkest corners of the human heart, the capacity for cruelty, the fragility of trust, and the lengths to which one might go to seek closure in a world turned upside down. This tale challenges us to question how far love can truly go, and whether forgiveness is possible when the wounds run so deep. It's a powerful exploration of the vulnerability we risk when we open ourselves to another person and what happens when that vulnerability is exploited. David's life seemed like a reflection of everything society told him he should want: success, stability, and love. He had a steady job at a tech company, a career he enjoyed that gave him a sense of purpose and accomplishment. His wife, Lisa, was everything to him. They'd met in college, and their bond had grown over the years. They had shared laughter, dreams, and the quiet comfort of simply being together. They were each other's best friend, confidant, and lover. To David, Lisa wasn't just his partner. She was his rock. Their home was a symbol of their shared journey, beautifully furnished with memories, laughter, and plans for the future. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, where life felt peaceful and predictable. They were the couple that everyone admired. Friends would often ask how they managed to make it look so effortless. The answer was simple, at least to David: they had trust, communication, and love. They had built a life together from the ground up, supporting each other through the highs and lows of life. Lisa was the woman he wanted to grow old with, and he believed their future was solid and certain. But as with many stories of betrayal, things are rarely as perfect as they seem on the outside. It started with small changes, subtle shifts in Lisa's behavior. At first, David didn't notice. After all, life was busy, and they both had their own responsibilities. Lisa began to work longer hours at her job, telling David that she had important projects to finish. She seemed more distant, more preoccupied, but David chalked it up to the pressures of work. She was always so driven, and he admired that about her. Maybe she just needed some space, he thought. But then came the inconsistencies, the small, seemingly insignificant things that raised a flag in David's mind. Lisa was late coming home more often, and when she did arrive, she was tired, distant, and unwilling to talk about her day. Her phone was constantly glued to her hand, and when David asked about it, she would brush him off, saying it was just work stuff. He noticed that she was often texting or on the phone late into the night, but whenever he asked who she was talking to, her response was vague, something like, just a colleague or nothing important. David didn't want to overreact. He trusted Lisa. They had always been open with each other, and he didn't want to jump to conclusions. But a nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. He started to second-guess his own instincts, wondering if he was being paranoid or overly sensitive. Then one fateful evening, everything changed. David came home early from work, hoping to surprise Lisa with a quiet evening together. As he walked through the front door, he heard the sound of a voice, deep, familiar, yet unmistakably male. He froze. The voice wasn't coming from the living room. It was coming from their bedroom. David's heart raced, his mind reeling with confusion and disbelief. He took a deep breath and walked toward the sound, unsure of what he might find. As he opened the bedroom door, he saw something that would forever change the course of his life. There, on their bed, was Lisa, in the arms of another man. The world seemed to tilt beneath David's feet. His breath caught in his chest. His mind couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. It was a gut-wrenching blow, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. The man looked up, eyes wide with shock, and Lisa quickly pulled away from him, her face drained of color as she saw David standing there. For a long, unbearable moment, no one spoke. The silence was deafening, the weight of betrayal thick in the air. David's heart shattered, but his first instinct wasn't anger or violence, it was disbelief. He had been so sure of their love, so certain of Lisa's loyalty. How could she do this to him? And with someone else? He had always thought that no matter what, their love would be strong enough to overcome anything. But now, standing there, he realized how wrong he had been. Lisa was speechless at first, and then she began to apologize, tears streaming down her face. But her words were hollow to David. He could hear the guilt in her voice, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. She explained that it had started as a friendship, something innocent that had gradually turned into something more. She confessed that she had been feeling neglected, that she had needed attention that David hadn't been giving her. But those excuses felt empty, as though she was trying to justify something that could never be justified. David's world, once full of love and promise, now felt cold, dark, and foreign. The woman he had trusted with everything, the one who knew his deepest fears and greatest dreams, had betrayed him in the most profound way. It wasn't just the act of infidelity that hurt, though that was enough. It was the realization that Lisa had kept this secret from him, had lied to his face for who knows how long, and as if the betrayal weren't enough, the lies began to pile up. Lisa tried to explain, tried to make David understand, but the truth had been twisted so many times that it was impossible to untangle. The man she had been seeing was someone from her office, a colleague who had wormed his way into her life, and at some point, she had allowed him to become more than just a friend. It wasn't just an affair, it was a manipulation, a slow erosion of everything David thought he knew about her and their relationship. In the aftermath, David found himself lost in a fog of hurt and confusion. The woman he had loved and trusted had turned into someone unrecognizable. It wasn't just the affair that had shattered him, it was the emotional manipulation, the lies, and the deep sense of betrayal that cut him to his core. And though part of him wanted to fight for their relationship, to salvage the pieces, another part of him felt the searing sting of reality. Their love had been a lie. The life they had built together was built on foundations of deceit. David would never be the same again. His once peaceful existence was now torn apart, leaving him to rebuild, either alone or with a broken version of the woman he once loved. But one thing was certain: the world he knew had been shattered, and trust, once lost, would never come easily again. For 6 years, David and Lisa's relationship had been the picture of harmony. Their friends often marveled at how in sync they were. They shared an unspoken understanding, an effortless bond that made their connection appear unshakable. They had built their life together brick by brick: vacations, anniversaries, quiet nights spent curled up on the couch, dreaming of the future. Lisa was always the perfect partner, loving, supportive, and ever-present. She was the kind of woman who made David feel safe, who provided him with the kind of love he'd always dreamed of. David, in return, was deeply devoted to Lisa. He trusted her implicitly, believing that together they could weather anything life threw their way. But behind the scenes, things were beginning to shift. It started with the little things, so subtle that David almost overlooked them. Lisa was spending more time out of the house. At first, it seemed harmless enough: a few extra hours at work, a quick dinner with friends. But over time, these harmless occasions became more frequent, and David began to notice that Lisa's attention was slowly shifting elsewhere. She was still affectionate with him, still present in the ways that mattered, but there was something in her eyes that David couldn't quite place. A distance, a sense of detachment that wasn't there before. It wasn't until Lisa mentioned Derek, her ex-boyfriend from college, that David started to feel a prickle of unease. Lisa casually brought up Derek one evening, as if he were just another person in her life, a simple old friend who she hadn't seen in years. She said they had reconnected and were catching up every so often. David, caught off guard, smiled and nodded, not wanting to seem overly protective or suspicious. Lisa reassured him that it was all innocent, just two people reminiscing about the past. She insisted that there was nothing to worry about, nothing more to it than old memories being shared between friends. But despite her reassurances, something inside David began to stir. He trusted Lisa, yes, but Derek wasn't just any old friend. He was a man who had once been very close to Lisa, intimately close. The thought of her spending time with someone who had once been part of her life in such an intimate way stirred an uncomfortable feeling in David's gut. He knew he couldn't just dismiss the nagging suspicion growing in his mind. It wasn't like him to doubt Lisa, but there was an undercurrent of tension now that he couldn't ignore. Still, Lisa's insistence that everything was fine made David question himself. He didn't want to seem controlling or insecure. After all, they had a strong relationship built on trust. What reason did he have to question her? He tried to push his concerns aside, convincing himself that Lisa had always been the kind of woman who would never betray him. But over time, the pattern became more noticeable. Lisa would mention Derek more frequently in passing. She would talk about their long conversations, how they would reminisce about their college days, share old jokes, and talk about things they hadn't in years. David would find her lost in thought after these meetings, her eyes far away, as though she were reliving some part of her past that he wasn't a part of. And then, there was the one thing that David couldn't ignore: the late-night phone calls. Lisa had always been open with her phone, leaving it around without concern. But suddenly, she became protective of it, turning the screen away when David entered the room or becoming defensive when he asked about a missed call. She would reassure him, brushing it off with a quick excuse that it was just a work-related call or something trivial. But David couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than Lisa was letting on. Still, she continued to insist that he had nothing to worry about. Derek was just a friend, she said. She had no feelings for him anymore, no romantic interest. He was just someone to catch up with, a fleeting part of her past that held no weight in her present. And for a while, David believed her. He loved Lisa, and he wanted to believe that their marriage was strong enough to withstand any outside influence. But his instincts, the little voice inside him told him otherwise. David knew something had changed, even if he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. He had been with Lisa long enough to know when things felt off, and lately, he had started to feel like a stranger in his own marriage. The intimacy they once shared seemed to fade into the background as Lisa's time and energy shifted towards someone else. And yet, every time David tried to voice his concerns, Lisa dismissed them with ease. She would reassure him, hold him close, and remind him that he was the one she had chosen, the one she loved. But the more she reassured him, the more David couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was brewing behind the facade of their perfect life. Then, one day, the truth would come to light, just how far Lisa had allowed her connection with Derek to go. But until then, David was caught in the confusing limbo of doubt and trust, of love and suspicion, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the woman who seemed to be slipping away into the arms of someone else. David had tried to push the doubts aside. He had tried to trust Lisa, to believe that her reassurances meant something, that their bond was unbreakable. But the cracks were starting to show, and no matter how much he wanted to ignore them, they were impossible to overlook. Lisa's late nights had become more frequent. The secretive phone calls, the way she would guard her phone with an almost obsessive attention, never letting it leave her side, started to gnaw at David's nerves. And more than that, there was a growing emotional distance between them. The warmth that had once defined their relationship was slipping away, replaced with coldness and indifference. Lisa had been acting different for weeks, but it wasn't until that day, the day David found the phone, that everything came crashing down. It wasn't intentional. He didn't plan to invade her privacy, but something inside him snapped, an overwhelming need to understand, to find clarity in a situation that had become clouded by suspicion and fear. He had been working in the living room when he noticed Lisa's phone lying on the kitchen counter. It was face up, abandoned for a brief moment. She had gone to the bathroom, leaving the phone unattended. David stood still for a moment, his mind wrestling with his instincts. Should I look? Would this be crossing a line? But as the seconds ticked by, the pull to understand her actions, to uncover the truth, became too strong. He told himself he wasn't snooping, he wasn't looking for something to accuse her of. He was simply trying to make sense of the changes in their relationship, to find answers to the questions that had been tormenting him for weeks. He was just trying to make sure that his suspicions, his gut feeling, were wrong. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for her phone, unlocking it with the familiar passcode she'd never bothered to hide from him. The screen blinked to life, and for a moment, he hesitated. But that hesitation only lasted for a split second. David didn't know it at the time, but that moment of weakness, his choice to take that step, would forever alter the trajectory of his life. At first, it seemed harmless. Text messages, emails, notifications, all innocuous enough. Lisa's calendar was full of appointments, reminders for work, and some notes about things they had planned together. But as David scrolled deeper, something caught his eye, something that made his stomach drop. A series of text messages from Derek. The name wasn't unfamiliar to him. After all, Lisa had mentioned him often. But this was different. These messages were intimate. Too intimate. David's eyes moved rapidly across the screen, unable to tear himself away. The messages weren't just casual check-ins. They were laced with an undertone that was far too personal, far too comfortable. They joked about old memories, shared inside jokes from their college days, but what really made David's heart race was the underlying flirtation, the playful remarks that hinted at something more. "I miss you," one message read. "I can't wait to see you again. Let's make it soon, just the two of us." David felt a chill run down his spine as he read them, one after another, the words sinking deeper into him. Then came the photos. At first, it was just a simple selfie of the two of them, Lisa and Derek, laughing together in some unknown setting. But as David scrolled further, the photos became more suggestive, more revealing. There were photos of Lisa, dressed in clothes that David hadn't seen her wear at home, her hair done in a way that wasn't her usual style. Some of the pictures were taken in the middle of their shared conversations, moments when they'd both been talking about past times, memories. But now, those moments had a different meaning. Why did she send him these? And there, buried within the messages, was one that David would never forget. A message from Lisa, written just the day before. "I'm so glad you're back in my life, Derek. I've missed you in ways I can't explain. I feel like a part of me has been missing, but now it's whole again." David's breath caught in his chest. The words were a dagger to his heart, each letter like an unbearable weight. He stared at the phone screen, his mind unable to comprehend what he was seeing. His wife, the woman he had built a life with, the woman he had trusted completely, had been having an emotional, if not physical, affair with her ex. And what was worse, it wasn't just a slip-up, a one-time mistake. It was ongoing. The messages, the photos, the words, they spoke to something much deeper, something more entangled than David could have ever imagined. The truth hit him like a freight train, and it was almost impossible to breathe. The world around him seemed to collapse, his vision narrowing as the room spun. He couldn't believe it. This wasn't the woman he thought he knew. The woman who had promised to love him, to stay by his side. She had betrayed him, not just with her body, but with her heart. As he sat there, holding Lisa's phone in his trembling hands, 1,000 emotions collided inside him. Anger, hurt, disbelief, sadness, they all battled for control over his mind and heart. But above all, there was a sharp, unrelenting pain, the feeling of being blindsided, the realization that the woman he had loved and trusted more than anyone in the world had been lying to him, betraying him in the most intimate way possible. David didn't know how long he sat there, frozen in place, staring at the messages that would forever change everything. All he could think about was the life he had built, the future they had shared, now irreparably damaged by lies and deceit. In that moment, David knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The trust they had shared, the foundation upon which their marriage had stood, had crumbled in the blink of an eye, and there was no going back. The messages between Lisa and Derek weren't just casual exchanges, they were intimate and charged with a closeness that went far beyond friendship. David's fingers trembled as he scrolled through the conversations, each message a gut-wrenching revelation. It wasn't just the flirtation that hit him, it was the emotional depth of their connection, something that seemed to have blossomed without his knowledge, without his consent. The realization sunk in like a weight pressing on his chest. His worst nightmare was unfolding before him. David had always trusted Lisa. He had never imagined that she would be capable of betraying him, especially not with someone like Derek, her ex-boyfriend, the man from her past. The man she had once loved. But the truth was undeniable now. Lisa hadn't just been rekindling an old friendship with Derek. She had been falling back into the arms of the man she had once shared a life with, emotionally and physically. It wasn't just a brief lapse in judgment. It was an affair, a deep, secretive relationship that had been ongoing for months. The messages were an undeniable testament to the emotional connection between Lisa and Derek. At first, the exchanges seemed harmless enough, innocent catch-ups between two people who had once been close. But as David continued to read, the tone shifted. The playful banter turned into something more intimate. Derek began to express longing, a sense of yearning for Lisa that was impossible to ignore. He would send her messages like, "I miss your laugh," or "I've been thinking about you all day," followed by heart emojis or other symbols of affection. These weren't the messages of two people just reconnecting, they were the words of someone who had rekindled a romance, someone who still had feelings for Lisa. But it wasn't just Derek's messages that cut deep, it was Lisa's replies. David's heart clenched as he read the words she had sent back. She had not only allowed Derek to express his longing, but she had reciprocated it. "I miss you too," one message read. "I think about you all the time. It feels like we never really stopped being together." David could feel the anger rising in his chest as he read those words. How could she say that? How could she tell him, the man she had built a life with, that she thought about Derek all the time? That she missed him in ways that were reserved for someone she had loved deeply? The trust that David had placed in Lisa seemed like a fragile illusion now, shattered beyond repair. She had been emotionally tied to Derek in a way that she should have been with him, her husband. The man who had stood by her, supported her, loved her unconditionally. Then came the more explicit messages. There were flirtatious comments, jokes about how they used to be so good together, and hints at more physical encounters. There were descriptions of moments they had shared, times when they had been intimate, their past together being relived in vivid detail. "I wish we could have what we had back," one message from Derek read. "I still remember how good it felt when we were together. It's not the same without you." And Lisa, unable, or unwilling, to stop herself, responded, "I remember it too. I miss you in ways I can't even explain. Being with you was so easy. Everything felt right when we were together." David's eyes blurred with tears, but he couldn't tear himself away from the phone. He wanted to stop reading, to block out the hurt, but it was like a magnetic pull. He couldn't escape the words. He couldn't unsee what he had already read. It wasn't just the physical act of cheating that devastated him. It was the emotional betrayal that cut deeper. Lisa wasn't just sleeping with Derek, she was emotionally invested in him. She had fallen back into the arms of the man she once loved, someone who was no longer a part of her life but who had become someone she needed again. This wasn't a fling, a brief lapse in judgment. This was a rekindled relationship, one that had been growing slowly but surely behind David's back. David could feel the ground beneath him shift, as though the very foundation of his life had cracked wide open. Lisa had betrayed him, not just with her body, but with her heart. She had opened up to Derek in ways she had once opened up to him, confiding in him, sharing her emotions and desires, her deepest thoughts. She had allowed herself to become vulnerable with him, and in doing so, she had closed the door on the relationship she had with David. She had replaced him in every sense, except in name. And then came the most painful part of all, the realization that Lisa had lied to him. The late nights she spent out, the secretive phone calls, the time spent with Derek, it had all been cloaked in lies. Every time she told him she was just catching up with an old friend, she had been masking the truth. The lies she had told, the excuses she had made to cover up her affair, made the betrayal feel even worse. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about the deceit that had been wrapped around it. Lisa had built a facade of normalcy, hiding the truth from David in plain sight. As the messages continued to unfold, David's mind raced with anger and heartbreak. He could see it all now, the way Lisa had withdrawn from him emotionally, how she had started keeping secrets, how she had grown colder and more distant. It wasn't just that she had been having an affair, it was that she had been so lost in it, so caught up in her feelings for Derek, that she had stopped being present for him altogether. The love that David thought they shared had been replaced by the love she once had for someone else. In the silence of that moment, as David sat there with Lisa's phone in his trembling hands, he felt like he was drowning in grief. His life, his relationship, his trust, everything had been built on a lie. Lisa wasn't just a person who had made a mistake, she had been living a double life, hiding her emotional connection with Derek for months. And now, David had no choice but to face the devastating truth. Lisa had been seeing Derek behind his back, not just physically, but emotionally. And that, more than anything, was the betrayal that would haunt him for the rest of his life. David stood there, holding Lisa's phone, the weight of the truth pressing down on him like a suffocating blanket. The evidence was undeniable, every message, every word, every photo confirmed what his instincts had been telling him for weeks. Lisa had been cheating on him, emotionally and physically, with Derek, the man from her past. She had been lying to him for months, weaving a web of deceit that David had never seen coming. The air in the room was thick with tension as David finally decided he could no longer keep the truth to himself. He had to confront her. He couldn't go on living a lie, pretending that everything was fine when he knew, deep down, that his entire world had been shattered. His hands were still trembling as he placed the phone on the table in front of her, the messages glaring at her like a mirror to her betrayal. Lisa looked up, her eyes widening in shock as she saw the phone. Her face immediately shifted, a mask of fear and guilt overtaking her features. "David, what is this?" she stammered, trying to mask the panic rising in her chest. Her voice wavered, and for a split second, David thought she might just tell him the truth. But then, like clockwork, the defensiveness kicked in. I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cracking, the first of many lies slipping from her lips. "This isn't what you think." David's heart sank as the words spilled from her. He wanted to believe her, just for a moment. He wanted to tell himself that maybe there was some kind of misunderstanding, that the messages weren't as bad as they seemed. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had seen the evidence with his own eyes. He couldn't unsee it. "She had been lying to me this whole time." Lisa tried to avert her gaze, shifting uncomfortably in her seat, but David wasn't buying it. He shoved the phone toward her, his voice cold, steady, and filled with the hurt of someone who had been betrayed in the most intimate way. "Lisa, don't lie to me," he said, his voice shaking with a combination of anger and heartbreak. "I've seen everything. The messages, the photos, the truth is staring at us both. How long were you planning on keeping this from me? How long were you going to continue living this lie?" Lisa's eyes welled up with tears, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone, but she couldn't even bring herself to look at it. She dropped her head into her hands, letting out a sob. "I'm sorry," she whispered between her tears. "I never meant for this to happen. Please, David, please. I don't want to lose you." David felt the flood of emotions crash over him: anger, betrayal, sadness. He had been prepared for a confrontation, but the sight of Lisa crying, begging for forgiveness, only made the pain worse. She hadn't just made a mistake. She hadn't just had a brief lapse in judgment. She had been living a double life, lying to him for months, hiding a relationship with Derek that went far beyond a simple friendship. Her tears felt hollow to him now, the years of trust they had built reduced to ashes in front of his eyes. That he stepped back, feeling the weight of everything on his shoulders. He could barely breathe, his chest tightening with the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. "How could she do this to me?" he thought. "How could she have lied to me for so long?" "Don't," David said, cutting her off as she continued to cry. "Don't tell me you're sorry. Don't tell me this is a mistake. What you did was a choice. You chose him. Over me. Over us." The room fell silent, the only sound the quiet sobs that escaped from Lisa's lips. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with shame, but her words still came in weak protests. "I didn't mean for it to get so out of control, David. I thought it was just talking at first. I thought we were just reconnecting. But I got lost in it. I got lost in him again. I never wanted to hurt you." David's mind swirled with the hurtful, haunting words. She got lost in it, she got lost in him again. It was as if everything they had shared together had been meaningless in comparison to what she had with Derek. She had gone back to a man from her past, someone who had once held her heart, and allowed him to take a piece of it again. She hadn't just been physically unfaithful, she had been emotionally unfaithful. She had fallen back into a relationship with Derek, one that didn't just involve sex, but a deep emotional connection that David couldn't compete with. "And what about the lies, Lisa?" David asked, his voice strained. "What about the lies you've been telling me for months? The late nights, the secret phone calls, the times you went out without telling me where you were going. All of that was just nothing? Just catching up with an old friend? How long were you planning on hiding this from me? Lisa's face turned pale, and she buried her face in her hands again. The guilt was written all over her, but it didn't erase the damage. She couldn't take back what she had done. The trust they had built was gone, completely shattered. Her promises felt like empty words now, words that had no weight because they had been broken long before. "I'm sorry," she repeated, but the words felt like a feeble attempt to undo the damage. "I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for things to go this far. Please, please, don't leave me. I'll do anything." David couldn't look at her anymore. Every word she spoke felt like another layer of deceit, another nail in the coffin of their marriage. The love he had for her had been built on trust, trust that had now been obliterated. He could see through her apologies now, see the cracks in her sincerity. She had lied, and not just about one thing. She had lied about everything, about where she had been, who she had been with, what she was feeling. And now, as he stood before her, the weight of those lies crushed him. "Lisa, I don't know how to trust you anymore," David said, his voice low and steady. "I can't keep living a lie. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when I know you've been lying to me for months." The finality of his words hung in the air. Lisa's tears didn't stop, but David's heart had hardened. He could no longer let himself be consumed by the hope that things could return to the way they were. The woman he had loved and trusted had betrayed him in the most painful way possible. And as much as he wanted to believe her promises, believe that things could change, it was clear that the damage was irreversible. The trust had been shattered beyond repair. David had left. The apartment was small, just a temporary place to escape the suffocating reality of his life with Lisa. The heartbreak was unbearable, a constant ache that gnawed at him from the inside. But as much as it hurt, he knew he couldn't stay. Not with someone who had so easily, so completely, betrayed him. He couldn't stay with a woman who had not only lied to him for months, but had also shattered everything they had built together. The trust, the love, it was all gone. And with that, so was his reason to stay in that house, that life, that marriage. The days in his new apartment blurred together. He spent his time surrounded by boxes, attempting to rebuild from the wreckage, but every moment felt like a struggle. He couldn't escape the image of Lisa crying, begging him to stay. He couldn't stop hearing her voice, filled with empty promises of change. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget the weight of her betrayal. It lingered in his mind, in his every thought, like a shadow that refused to leave. David thought he could escape it all. He tried to move forward, to focus on his own healing. He spent time with friends, went for long walks, tried to regain a sense of normalcy. But no matter what he did, there was always a part of him that felt like he was walking through life in a fog, a haze of sadness and anger. Every time he picked up his phone, he would check it, hoping for a text, a sign that he could put the pieces of his life back together. But there were no apologies anymore. No words of regret from Lisa, that was, until one night, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Lisa. He hadn't heard from her in weeks. It had been quiet, too quiet, and part of him had hoped that, maybe, she had come to terms with what she'd done. But the message she sent was not one of apology. It was not one of remorse. It was a bombshell, dropped with all the weight of the lies that had already broken them. "I have to tell you something," the message read. "David, I'm pregnant. It's yours." David's heart stopped, the words seemed to hang in the air in front of him, disbelieving. Pregnant. The word echoed in his mind as he reread the message, over and over, as if by doing so, he could convince himself it was a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. Lisa wasn't the type of person to joke about something like this. And the truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He had been betrayed emotionally, physically, and now, this. She was pregnant, and the child was his. The weight of the revelation crashed down on him, and for a long moment, David couldn't even process it. His mind spun. How was this even possible? Had she been with Derek during the affair? Was it his baby? But then the thought hit him, no, she had been with me, too. I was the one she was lying to. It could only be mine, the confusion, the anger, the hurt, all mixed together in a perfect storm of emotions that left him feeling sick. The questions that immediately flooded his mind were ones he didn't want to answer, but he had no choice. The guilt, the sense of responsibility, came crashing in. How could he even consider what to do now? His world had already been shattered by her betrayal, but this was a new level of devastation. How was he supposed to feel? Did he want to have a child with the woman who had lied to him, who had so easily torn apart everything they had? He immediately tried to call her, his fingers pressing the dial button almost instinctively. His mind raced with questions, with anger, with disbelief. Lisa picked up on the second ring, her voice strained, shaky. "David, you need to understand, this changes everything," she began, but David cut her off. "No, Lisa," he snapped, his voice thick with frustration. "This doesn't change anything. How could you keep something like this from me? You lied to me, you cheated on me, and now you're telling me you're pregnant? What the hell do you expect from me?" "I didn't know how to tell you," Lisa's voice faltered. "I didn't want to hurt you more than I already have. But I didn't want you to find out from someone else." "Find out from someone else? You should have told me the moment you found out. You should have been honest with me about everything, not just dropped this bombshell now, when you think it's convenient." David's voice cracked with emotion. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now. I'm already dealing with the fact that you've destroyed everything, and now you're telling me that you're carrying my child? How could you not tell me sooner?" Lisa's voice broke, and she let out a sob. "I'm sorry, David. I'm so sorry for everything. I made so many mistakes. But I'm asking you to be here for this child. We can try to make things right. Please." David closed his eyes, his hand gripping the phone tightly. His chest felt tight with a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, anger, confusion, and even a twisted sense of guilt. He couldn't even begin to understand how to process it all. The truth was that Lisa had not only betrayed him and broken his heart, but now, she had tied him to her forever with this child. His mind raced with the weight of the responsibility. What was he supposed to do? Part of him wanted to walk away, to wash his hands of it all. He had already been hurt enough. But another part of him, the part that had always cared for Lisa, despite everything, felt the tug of responsibility. This was his child. He couldn't just ignore it. David didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: Lisa's betrayal wasn't over. She had dropped a bombshell that turned everything he thought he knew upside down. The pain and heartbreak were far from over. Now, David had to face a new, painful reality. A reality where the woman who had destroyed his trust had also made sure he would never fully be able to walk away from her. She had kept the truth from him, lied, cheated, and now she was asking him to step back into a life he could never fully reclaim. David's heart felt heavier than ever before, and he knew that the road ahead would be long, painful, and filled with uncertainty. But for now, all he could do was listen to Lisa's pleading voice on the other end of the phone and wonder what the hell he was supposed to do next. Months passed, and David had tried to find some semblance of peace in the aftermath of Lisa's bombshell. The initial shock of her pregnancy had been a heavy weight, but with time, he'd convinced himself that he could move on, that he could rebuild his life. He'd taken small steps toward healing, finding a routine, focusing on his work, and avoiding anything that would bring him back to the painful memories of his relationship with Lisa. But there was always that nagging question, the feeling that something was still unresolved. Then, one morning, a package arrived at his apartment. It was small and unassuming, but the return address caught his eye. It was from Lisa. His stomach dropped, a wave of dread flooding him. He hadn't heard from her in weeks, not since that painful conversation about the baby. A part of him hoped that the silence meant she was finally moving on, that she was allowing him the space to do the same. But the package, with its mysterious contents, told a different story. David opened it cautiously, not knowing what to expect. Inside was a DNA test kit, along with a letter, folded neatly and resting on top of the box. His hands felt heavy as he unfolded the letter and began to read *, David, *, the letter began, *, I've been holding something back from you. Something I can't hide any longer. You need to know the truth. *, David's heart began to race. He could already feel his breath quicken as he continued reading. *, You are the father of my son. *, the words seemed to blur as his mind tried to process them. He stared at the letter in disbelief. She wasn't just telling him something he had already suspected. No, Lisa was confirming the one thing that had haunted him for months: he was the father of her child. His stomach churned as a wave of emotions washed over him: anger, confusion, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of dread. David had known the child could be his, but the way Lisa had handled everything had left him uncertain. Her message about being pregnant, her attempts to pull him back into her life, had all been vague, desperate. The idea of him being tied to her, to this child, in a way he wasn't prepared for, had always been something he couldn't quite grasp. But now, she was pushing him to confront it head-on, asking him to accept the responsibility. David read the letter again, the words cutting deeper with each pass. She explained how, after the initial shock of finding out she was pregnant, she had kept the truth from him, telling herself that perhaps it wasn't necessary to bring him into the picture. She had hoped to manage it on her own, to raise the child without needing to rely on him, but as the baby's birth grew closer, Lisa realized that she couldn't hide the truth anymore. She needed him to know. David, the letter continued, I know I've made so many mistakes. I know I've hurt you in ways that I can never undo, but I need to tell you this because it's time for you to know the truth. You are his father. And no matter how much I've messed up, you deserve to know your son. I can't make the decision for you, but I'm asking you to be a part of his life. Please, for his sake, and for yours. This is something I should have told you a long time ago, and I'm sorry that I didn't. But now, I can't keep it from you any longer. David sat down slowly, the letter still clutched tightly in his hand. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, none of them making sense. The anger he had felt toward Lisa still simmered beneath the surface, but now there was something else. A sense of responsibility. Of duty. He was a father, whether he was ready for it or not. He thought about his son. The child who had been conceived out of a relationship built on lies, deceit, and betrayal. The child who, through no fault of his own, had been caught in the middle of his parents' broken relationship. What was he supposed to do now? Could he face being a father to a child he wasn't sure he even wanted to be a part of? Could he accept a connection to Lisa, a woman who had destroyed his trust in ways he hadn't thought possible? And yet, even with all the pain, all the uncertainty, there was still a part of David that couldn't ignore the pull of fatherhood. His son. The child who would need him, whether he was prepared or not. David glanced at the DNA test kit, which now felt like an undeniable truth that had to be confronted. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to feel, but the reality of the situation was clear: he had a child. And that child, whether he liked it or not, was a part of him. The choice to accept that responsibility wasn't simple, it was tangled with emotions, with resentment, and with the ghosts of his past with Lisa. But it was also a decision he couldn't ignore. Taking a deep breath, David placed the letter down on the table, the weight of the situation heavy on his chest. He had a choice to make. Could he forgive Lisa for everything she had done? Could he embrace fatherhood despite the painful history between them? And most importantly, could he be the father his son needed, even when he had no idea where to begin? As David sat in the silence of his apartment, the reality of the decision loomed over him. The letter and DNA kit were just the beginning. The hardest part, he knew, was yet to come. How would he navigate this new chapter of his life, where the lines between love, betrayal, and responsibility blurred in ways he never thought possible? There was no easy answer. But the truth was clear: David had a son. And that truth, painful as it was, would change everything. David's mind was in a whirlwind of confusion as he processed the letter. A child, the words seemed surreal, like a concept he couldn't quite wrap his head around. Lisa had been pregnant? How had he not realized? The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. All this time, his life had been consumed with the betrayal, with the affair. His trust had been shattered in the most painful way possible. But now, this new bombshell felt like it was twisting the knife even deeper. He remembered how Lisa had mentioned her pregnancy in their last conversation. She'd told him she was carrying his child, and he had felt a strange mix of guilt and anger. Guilt because, despite everything, a part of him still cared for her, and anger because she had lied about the situation from the very beginning. But now, as the letter revealed the truth, a sickening thought gnawed at him. Had she been carrying Derek's child all along? David's stomach churned at the thought. Lisa's affair with Derek hadn't just been a betrayal of trust, it had been an emotional and physical connection that seemed to have reignited something between them. David's mind couldn't help but go back to that moment when he first discovered the affair. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the emotional distance between them, it all made sense now. But the idea that Lisa could have been carrying Derek's child, while still pretending to have a future with David, was a betrayal so deep, so gut-wrenching, that it felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling. He tried to make sense of it all. What if the baby was Derek's? What if she'd been lying to him even more than he thought? The thought tortured him. He had assumed, after the initial shock of the pregnancy, that he could have been the father, that maybe, despite everything, they could try to make it work for the sake of the child. But now, with the weight of Lisa's letter, everything felt so much more complicated. She hadn't just lied about her affair with Derek, she had lied about the most crucial part, the child. Had she been holding on to him in case things with Derek didn't work out? Had she wanted to have it both ways? David knew he needed answers, but the truth felt almost impossible to uncover. Was this my child? Or was it Derek's? The questions tumbled around in his mind, unanswered. The only thing he could be sure of was that Lisa had once again manipulated him, leaving him with no clarity, no peace of mind. It wasn't just the affair that was tormenting him, it was the sense of uncertainty that hung in the air, the knowledge that nothing about this situation could be trusted, not her words, not her actions, not her promises. In that moment, David was consumed by the overwhelming thought that Lisa's betrayal was more than just an affair. It was a complete collapse of everything he had believed about their relationship. He had loved her, had trusted her with everything. But she had not only cheated on him physically, she had twisted their entire future into something unrecognizable. He couldn't even be sure that the child she claimed to be his was, in fact, his. David felt sick to his stomach as his mind spiraled. Every possible scenario seemed worse than the last. If the child was his, would he be able to look at him without seeing the betrayal? Would he ever be able to accept this baby as his own, knowing that it had come into the world in the shadow of such deep deceit? If the child was Derek's, how could he possibly share that connection with Lisa? Could he ever trust her again, let alone raise a child together after everything that had happened? He sat in silence, staring at the DNA test kit in front of him, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had no idea what this meant. A child. A life that could be tied to him, to Lisa, and to Derek, forever. He thought about how much he had already lost, his trust, his sense of security, his belief in love. And now, he was being asked to confront this new reality. No matter what the test revealed, his life would never be the same again. The consequences of Lisa's lies had spiraled far beyond what he had ever imagined. The more he thought about it, the the more David realized that the affair, in some ways, was the easier part to deal with. Betrayal in the form of lies and deceit could be understood, processed, and maybe even forgiven. But the child, the baby that was now a part of his life, whether he was ready or not, was something entirely different. It wasn't just about hurt feelings and broken trust. It was about responsibility, about a future that he hadn't even been prepared for. David looked at the DNA test again, wondering what kind of future he was stepping into. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like Lisa had been playing some long game with him all along. But even more devastating was the possibility that he could have been blinded by his own desire to believe in the woman he once loved, willing to forgive her because he wanted to believe that things could somehow return to normal, but there was no normal now. Everything had changed. He had no idea where this new chapter would take him, but he knew one thing for certain: whatever the result of the test, the truth had already hurt him more than he ever thought possible. The courtroom battle was grueling, an emotional and exhausting test of David's resilience. Lisa, desperate to salvage her reputation, spun a web of half-truths and accusations. She tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming she had been misunderstood, that she was only trying to find herself after a difficult period in their marriage. She pleaded with the court, hoping her charm and crocodile tears would sway the judge. But David, unwavering in his resolve, had the evidence, clear, irrefutable proof of Lisa's betrayal: the text messages, the phone records, the DNA test, all of it laid bare the truth. David had kept everything. Every call, every message, every deceitful action Lisa had taken behind his back, he had preserved. The betrayal she had thought would remain hidden had instead become the very weapon that would ensure her downfall. As the trial went on, it became apparent that Lisa's version of the story was falling apart. The more she tried to shift blame, the more her lies were exposed. David's lawyer presented the evidence meticulously, laying out every detail of the affair, every lie, and every moment where Lisa had manipulated the situation to her advantage. It was clear that Lisa had not just cheated on her husband, but had attempted to control the narrative of their life together, twisting David's reality to suit her own desires. When the judge finally rendered the verdict, it felt like the weight of the world was lifted off David's shoulders. He had fought not just for himself, but for the future of his son, who had been brought into this chaos through no fault of his own. The ruling was a victory, one that resonated far beyond the courtroom. David was granted full custody of his son. Lisa, who had tried so desperately to manipulate the situation, was ordered to pay a substantial amount in child support. But for David, it wasn't about the money, it was about something much more important. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming his life, his dignity, and most of all, his right to raise his son in a home filled with love and security, free from the toxicity that Lisa had brought into their lives. As David left the courtroom, he walked out with his head held high. The weight of the emotional battle was still there, but there was a sense of pride in his stride. He had faced the worst kind of betrayal, something that had shattered the foundation of his trust, his belief in love, and his entire future. But in the end, he had risen above it. He had fought for what was right and had emerged victorious. This victory wasn't about getting revenge on Lisa. It wasn't about rubbing her face in her mistakes or seeking to destroy her as she had tried to do to him. No, David's victory was about something far more meaningful. It was about reclaiming his own life and the future he wanted for his son. He had been through the darkest moments, but through it all, he had kept his focus on what mattered most: creating a safe, stable, and loving environment for his child. David's triumph was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. It wasn't just about fighting back against betrayal, it was about refusing to let it define him. The damage done by Lisa's affair had been devastating, but David chose not to let it ruin his life. Instead of wallowing in anger or revenge, he took control. He rebuilt his life piece by piece, taking back his power and using the pain to fuel his determination to do what was best for his son. David's story serves as a reminder that, no matter how deep the betrayal, there is always a path forward. Trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, and healing is possible, even in the wake of the most painful heartbreak. Sometimes, revenge isn't about getting back at the person who hurt you. It's about finding justice in your own way. It's about standing up for what's right and proving that no matter how hard life hits you, you can always rise again. In the end, David's son would grow up in a home where love was the foundation, where trust was a priority, and where betrayal had no place. Lisa's attempts to tear their world apart had failed. David had come out on top, not because he sought revenge, but because he chose to rise above it. His victory wasn't in punishing Lisa, it was in creating a life for his son that would be different from the one he had with her. A life filled with honesty, trust, and a love that could never be broken. David's triumph over betrayal was a victory for anyone who has ever faced the darkness of deception and hurt. It shows us that even when everything seems lost, there is always a way to fight for what's truly important. And in the end, that fight can lead to something greater than revenge, peace, justice, and a future filled with the love we deserve. In the face of a betrayal as deep and painful as David's, it's understandable to wonder, could you ever forgive someone who hurt you like this, or would the anger, the sense of injustice, be too overwhelming to let go of? For many people, the instinct is to fight back, to defend yourself, your heart, and your sense of self-worth. David's journey is a powerful example of standing up for what's right, of taking control when everything seems to be falling apart. His decision to not just forgive but to fight for his son's future was a brave one, and a necessary one. But would everyone take the same path? Some might argue that forgiveness is the key to healing, that in time, even the most devastating betrayal can be overcome. They may see David's fight for justice as a form of closure, a way to move forward without harboring bitterness. After all, holding on to anger can eat away at your own peace of mind. But for others, especially when the betrayal cuts as deep as David's did, forgiveness might seem impossible. The idea of simply letting go, of allowing someone who's lied, manipulated, and deceived you to walk free without facing the consequences, can feel like a disservice to yourself. David's response wasn't just about vengeance, it was about protecting his son and reclaiming control over his life. In a way, his decision to fight back was a declaration that he wouldn't let betrayal define him. He chose a path of justice and self-respect, not just for his son, but for himself. He could have chosen to forgive Lisa and move on quietly, but he chose to stand tall, to say that cheating, dishonesty, and manipulation wouldn't go unpunished. Now, this raises the question, what would you do in David's shoes? Could you find it in your heart to forgive someone who shattered your trust like this? Or would you feel the need to fight for what's yours and ensure that justice is served? Sometimes, the hardest thing in life is knowing when to let go, and when to stand your ground. This story is a reminder that betrayal can break you, but it doesn't have to define you. You have the power to choose how you respond to the pain, how you rebuild, and how you find justice in your own way. Whether you choose to forgive, to fight, or to do both in your own time, the key is remembering that you have the strength to heal, to rise above the hurt, and to create a future that's free of betrayal's shadow. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think it's possible to forgive someone who's hurt you like David was hurt? Or do you think that, sometimes, fighting back is the only way to reclaim your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of resilience, healing, and the incredible journeys of those who faced betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Life may not always go as planned, but it's the strength to keep moving forward that defines us. Your journey might be different, but remember, in every story of heartbreak, there's a chance for redemption. And sometimes, it's in those very moments of devastation that we discover our true strength.